Warm greetings of solidarity to everyone. I am Cian Guevara. This event is co-organized by the People's Rising for Climate Justice, ILPS Commission on Science and Technology, ILPS Commission on Environmental Concern, ILPS Commission on Indigenous Peoples and National Minorities, and the Global People's Caravan. As the world grapples with the escalating climate crisis, the Conference of Parties 28, the UNFCCC or COP28 emerges as a pivotal moment to chart towards sustainable based on decades who use their political and economic leverage to ensure that their profit interests remain intact. But throughout the world. Movement of Australia. He is currently the chairperson of the International League for People's Struggles, or ILPS, and works on many people's concerns across the globe and builds people's solidarity against imperialism. Len, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cian. Thank you to the ILPS Commissions number 10 and number 13 and the Global People's Caravan for the invitation. Welcome to everyone to this important webinar. Well, yet another COP conference, supposedly to deal with the climate crisis, is here. This time, COP28. This is the 28th such conference of world leaders and other participants. This process began more than 30 years ago. Despite that approximate 30 years, what's the real situation today that faces the people of the world in the looming climate catastrophe? Some time ago, scientists were worried that the world would reach or exceed 1.5 degrees of global warming in 20 years or so. Now they're concerned that it will be within 10 years or maybe sooner. What do the scientists predict will happen if or when the 1.5 degrees global warming is reached? They predict sea level rise, biodiversity loss, extreme weather, food shortages, total system collapse, that is climate catastrophe, all of this putting the lives of billions of people and umpteen non-human species at great risk. These predictions are becoming more obviously correct each day, witnessed already by extreme fires, floods, droughts, and people being driven or preparing to be driven from their homes and countries by sea level rise. And what is the main cause of these frightful developments? It is in part the continued use of fossil fuels, the expanded use of fossil fuels, and the greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutions created partly as a result of the use of these fossil fuels. What do the workers, peasants, other toilers across the globe and the poor countries in particular face? What will they face, and in fact what they are now facing as a result of global warming? Loss of income and employment, being driven out of their home and home country, loss of life, loss of food and food security, being forced to be a refugee, extreme fires, floods and droughts, the loss of their democratic and human rights, and so on. The UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, states that millions of people have already been internally displaced or sought refuge in other countries as a result of climate change conditions. Previous COP meetings over 30 years have failed to deliver the results required. Why? Because capitalism is the dominant force in the world today, and capitalism is frantically driven by the need for super profits and by greed. It is not concerned for the plight of the masses. Capitalism has developed into monopoly capitalism, into imperialism, and it will not make the changes required without being forced to by the people, by the workers, peasants, and other toilers of the world. Will capitalism stop fossil fuel production and mining? No, it will not. Will capitalism stop the rape and plunder of the third world people and countries? No, it will not. Previous COP conferences have produced modest emissions targets and many tongue-in-cheek promises, but they are too little and too pathetic. And even these meagre promises and targets are in the main not carried out. COP28 will also be pathetic. Add to this overall situation the horrors currently being faced in the world by military aggression and fascism, by imperialism, in such places as the Middle East, Ethiopia, Sudan, Myanmar, Ukraine, Philippines, Palestine, and other places, including the environmental damage being done by imperialist aggression and war. We need a united front and a mass movement of the world's people in country after country to replace the current for-profit and greed rulers and government. The demand for an urgent end to fossil fuel production and utilisation, and an urgent end to greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutions, and an urgent injection of funds to aid the people and governments in poor countries are some of the urgent requirements. Imperialism and its constant drive for super profits, its domination by the commitment to neoliberal economics and politics, will not meet these and other requirements to fight back against the climate crisis, a crisis that imperialism and its system itself has created. Only the people of the world in country after country can force the changes required, as you are helping to do in COP28 at Dubai. Your commitment to mobilising the vulnerable and poor communities who are already facing the onslaught of severe weather events, in many places being driven from their homes and countries, not only by climate change but also by imperialist aggression and war, is fundamental. The farce of COP28 in the current situation is further demonstrated by the US government pushing for the World Bank to become the host of the Loss and Damage Climate Fund. The World Bank is one of the very institutions used by US imperialism to profit from the peoples and governments of the world, and particularly by driving the program of neoliberalism, which for decades and decades has robbed the people and governments of the poor countries and even governments dominated by the US. This proposal would be laughable if it wasn't serious. Only mass mobilisations of the people demanding and fighting for urgent actions are required to provide us a chance to solve the climate crisis can produce the necessary result. The young people of the world have been showing us the way in this regard.
Recording in progress.
Only in this way will we do what science correctly requires to be done to solve the climate crisis. At the same time, we need to further expose the need to defeat the imperialist governance of the world and replace it with governance by the united front of working people, peasants, and other toilers. Instead of domination by the profit motive and greed, we would then be governed by the people's needs and the common good, thus replacing capitalism with socialism. Long live the growing anti-global warming movement. Long live the struggle against imperialism. Long live international solidarity. Change the system to save the planet. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Len, for that opening remarks. Indeed, imperialist countries have often been the ones at the forefront of destroying our planet, yet the people who are most affected are the ones who have least contributed to the global climate crisis that we are facing. So indeed, instead of them being the ones in power of COP28 and other negotiating panels and other avenues to talk about the future, we should be the ones at the forefront. And now it's time to actually hear it from the people who are most affected, from the workers, from the farmers, and from other grassroots organizations. We have our first speaker for today from the ILPS Australia. Peter Murphy is a longtime unionist and human rights worker, and he's been with solidarity groups for people's rights. And he's an internationalist and an esteemed peace advocate. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jan. Good evening from Australia. It's 11 o'clock at night here. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney. So I have a few remarks about the situation with a big focus on the trade union position in Australia. First of all, we have a government elected in May last year, 2022, which radically shifted the tone of Australian government policy on climate from climate denialism to some kind of climate action. However, the targets which it's committed to, which are much better than the previous government, still would not contribute to the world keeping warming to 1.5 or close to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. So it's, or any time. So we have still big challenges in Australia, and there's plenty of criticism of the government from the climate and environment movements. In particular, it's great. Again, I'd emphasize that the targets are better, but at the same time, despite the scientific findings, the actual policy at the global level, there are still new gas projects and new coal projects being. Maybe there's some interference there. Yeah. So new gas and coal projects are still being approved in Australia, and some of these are quite massive and therefore completely counterproductive in terms of actual effective climate action. So the workers are most concerned, I think, about the two conflicting things. One, they are very worried about climate catastrophe. We've had the massive bushfires. We've had really very severe flooding in Australia just in the recent years, and it's very clear danger to significant parts of the ecology in Australia, which the community recognises. On the other hand, and of course, we want action to minimize the damage or stop the damage. On the other hand, sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I'll just repeat a few of my comments. Workers in Australia are most concerned that the climate catastrophe is having big impacts on our communities, fires and floods, drought, and threat to the Great Barrier Reef and other parts of the ecology. That's one big concern. And the other is that the jobs of workers employed in the carbon-intensive sectors, that is in the coal mining itself, in the steel industry, in the fossil fuel-based electricity system, all of their jobs are at risk, and what's going to happen to those jobs in those communities. So we've had really zero effective action on that front in Australia, even though we've had the transition beginning. Really been addressed properly by anyone. And then another level of threat is the threat to Indigenous people, their rights in the face of the continuation of fossil fuel mining, and also the threat that a mining boom for metals to do with renewable energy like lithium and copper, especially nickel, this mining activity would be a continuing threat to the rights of Indigenous peoples in Australia. But the really present one is a mine in Queensland in a place called the Galilee Basin, which is being operated or built by the Adani company from India. I think the Adani Group is notorious for its abuse of Indigenous peoples and the environment. And there's a continuing campaign led by the Indigenous people in that region, very strongly supported by the environment movement, to minimize the potential of that mine to grow. So there's been a lot of delays on that project, and the struggle is continuing there. And then a sort of political concern of the workers' movement would be that whatever happens in this struggle, we have to try to keep the Conservatives out of power at the federal level in our country. So there is a sensitivity about how to engage the Labor government, which is doing something but not enough, without bringing back the Conservatives. The next election in Australia is only 18 months away, or maybe even less. And so this is an act of concern as well. So I would say that the trade union movement also has a key goal that in the transition to renewable energy, there must be more jobs of a secure, well-paid nature in Australia to build the various systems in the electricity area, in the transport area, and in general in the transition of the whole of industry to non-fossil fuel energy bases. There's some initiatives on this level, but it's very early, and it's very hard to see in Australia how much would be achieved, because most of this will be left to the private sector, subsidised by government payments rather than government-led. And so that's a problem. But I'll just finish my comments by saying that the most substantive thing, I think, from the trade union point of view, is that the government is just at this point of time creating a thing called a net zero authority, which would be able to regulate the carbon intensive sector for the transition. So this would be an agency created by federal law, and it would have the authority to direct private companies to take on workers who are displaced from some part of the sector, to invest in certain new technology, and to provide training for the new workforce which is required for this very big transition. So trade union people will be very significant in the leadership of this net zero authority. So I'm predicting that it will be very controversial. It'll be strongly supported, initially at least, by all the workers. But if it doesn't deliver, or if it's somehow derailed by corporate power, then that would also cause a a big threat to the immediate livelihoods of those communities, but also be a destabilizing political factor here in Australia. So that's the picture. I would say that there's a widespread awareness in the environment movement that capitalism is a really big problem, or a major driver of this whole crisis, and that there's got to be some way to change it. But there's very little real strategy for that. The trade union movement itself has got more history in that regard, but it's also not really elaborating any strategy that focuses in on these dynamics of capitalism which produce our crisis. However, as I said, the trade union movement's got a lot of legacy and history of struggling against capitalism, and so maximizing the initiatives that are underway and developing new ones, new demands, which extend the idea of the net zero authority not only to regulation of the sector, but also nationalising parts of the sector. It's very much on the table, I think. It's very achievable to put forward and even win these demands in this time, and we need to see more of that in Australia. That's the end of my remarks, Jan. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Peter, for giving us an insight on the situation of workers in Australia and giving us an insight as well on what workers and how workers and climate justice actually interact with one another. When we talk about just transition in the context of the climate crisis and adapting to the climate crisis and mitigating the climate crisis, workers and other affected people are asking the question, how do we actually do that? Okay, how are we going to be part of the solution? And so if you guys have any questions for Peter and for any of our other speakers, feel free to chat them in our Zoom chat box. For our live stream viewers as well on Facebook and on YouTube, you may comment your questions and the tech team will get those questions, and then we will talk about those later on during the open forum part. Now it's time for me to welcome our second speaker, Kurniawan Sabar. Kurniawan Wawan Sabar is from the Institute of National and Democracy Studies, or INDES. INDES is a member of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty and is part of its Asia Steering Council. Wawan currently holds key positions in relevant platforms, including the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness, or CPDE, and many others. Wawan is a rural people's researcher and activist based in Indonesia, working closely with grassroots peasant organizations on issues surrounding land reform, human rights, and climate justice. Take it away, Wawan.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and salam demokrasi from Indonesia. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak here in this very important moment. And I want to also use this space to deliver to us about the situation in Indonesia and what is our statement in relation to the Conference of the Parties 28 in Dubai, Uni Emirat Arab. Well, the climate change as well as the economic destruction, war and aggression are emerged from the protracted crisis of the world monopoly capitalist system. Therefore, it is inevitable that COP28 today take place amid the persistent resistance of the Palestinian people in facing war with Israel under the imperialist dictates of the United States, where the tens of thousands of people were killed and millions become the refugees. Imperialist war has become an extreme security threat to people's lives amid the climate crisis. COP28 is the momentum for the people of the world to expose false solution and the responsibility of the advanced capitalist industrial countries, imperialist corporations, and big landlords who are the main destroyer of the climate. Billions of the working class, poor, oppressed, and exploited people of the world have borne a double burden due to climate damage as a result of the exploitation of nature to serve the greedy of international monopoly capitalists under the dominations of the United States. Extreme hot weather, disruptions of seasonal cycles, drought, flash floods, tidal floods, erosion, forest fires, typhoons, landslides, crop failures, poverty, disease outbreaks, and even global hunger run very fast alongside the false solution snails from the COP annually. People are forced to adapt, build resilience to cover the failure of the global scheme for handling the climate crisis, which frees the climate destroyer countries from historical responsibilities, prolonged loss and damage in poor countries, semi-colonial and semi-feudal countries such as Indonesia, and various countries in Asia, Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. People are not blind. monopoly corporations continue to be allowed to destroy nature, the climate, and the lives of the working class throughout the world. The necessity to build a big and modern production system for the benefit of the people, environmentally friendly, and to end dependence on fossil fuel energy is covered with various rhetoric of false nature-based solution, technological improvement, energy transition, low carbon development, carbon capture storage, carbon offset, and rainforest protection pact. Everything becomes a cover to maintain and protect the productions of monopoly capitalists and big landlords who oppress and exploit the working class with the politics of low wage and working poor condition, grab the land of peasants, deprive rights and lives of fisher folk, youth, women, and national minorities. Monopoly production and market are actually increasingly brutal. Greenhouse gas emission continue to increase, so that increase of Earth's temperature can only be limited to 2.4 degrees of Celsius to 2.6 degrees of Celsius. It is very far from the target of the global target to limit the Earth temperature of 1.5 degrees of Celsius. The demand to realize justice with climate funding obligations is a winding and absurd path. 7 years after the 2015 Paris Agreement, $100 billion climate funding commitment per year that was opposed by the main imperialist country, the United States, its realization is only a claim of exaggregated numbers. One.org research report in 2023 shows that $343 billion or about 2/3 of climate funding commitment from 2013 to 2021 were never reported as having been disbursed or had nothing to do with the climate change. In 2021, advanced industrial countries claim to have contributed $89.6 billion to climate finance. But in the same year, military spending from these countries reached $1.3 trillion or 14 times their contribution, 14 times over their contribution to improvements of the climate. Now, the promise of new funding, the Loss and Damage Fund and the Adaptation Fund were proposed very ambitiously. One by one, the advanced and rich capitalist industrial countries expressed their commitment at the opening of the COP28. Apart from realizing that the realization of this commitment is like fulfilling a promise by means of war, the people of the world are demanding a commitment to a just transition and real funding for the interests of the people, not just a luxurious dinner that must be paid by the people by themselves, or a new business field for export capital finance of imperialists in form of debt and investment in the name of climate solution. The research report shows that more than half or 85% of climate finance distributed to 54 countries with severe debt problems between 2019 to 2021 was in the form of loans. This will be risking to exacerbate this country's debt problem and jeopardizing their ability to meet the needs of their citizens and address climate change in the long term. In Indonesia, since 2019, the Indonesian government has established the Environmental Fund Management Public Service Agency to manage environmental and climate funds with a blended finance mechanism under the Ministry of Finance. This agency managed funds amounting to $968.6 million until December 2022. These funds comes from the National State Budget, Green Climate Fund, Ford Foundation, and the debt from World Bank and other financial institutions for large-scale forest and land-based climate mitigation and adaptation program to achieve targets set in the Forest and Land Use Net Sink Indonesia 2030. The world already knows Indonesia is a rich biodiversity country and is a home to 10% of the world total tropical rainforest and has 36 of global tropical peatlands. Ironically, Indonesia is now the country with the second highest deforestation rate in the world, only after Brazil. The opening and expansions of large-scale monoculture plantations such as palm oil and timber plantation for pulp and paper in Indonesia has resulted the increasing widespread forest loss and destructions of peatland. This practice result the release of greenhouse gas emissions around 97% of total emission in Indonesia and was once positioned Indonesia as the fourth largest producers of greenhouse gas in the world in 2015. Towards the COP28, the Indonesian government is increasing the enhanced national determined contribution and also shows their ambition to achieve peak national greenhouse gas net emission of 1,000 to 244 million tons. This ambition means nothing if the government's ambition to make Indonesia the world's largest producer and exporter of crude palm oil is not stopped. Land grabbing and clearing of forests and peatland for palm oil plantation on large islands of Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Papua continues in various ways and forms. Palm oil plantation, which have reached 15 million hectares, will continue to be expanded. Coordinating Ministries of Industry and Trade already said that Indonesia needs 50 million hectares more of land to serve the world CPO needs by 2030. Just the remaining land in the hands of poor peasants and the ancestral land of national minority groups who are in difficulty and not having the ability in production work independently will also become a target of land confiscation and even change hands easily to big landlords. Nearly 10 years under the rule of President Joko Widodo, Indonesia peasantry and rural areas have only reflect the crimes and crises of the semi-colonial and semi-feudal system. The index of inequality control over land in rural areas continue to increase, namely 0.68%, or only 1% of those with the most power control 68% of the land in Indonesia. However, the President Jokowi government continues to encourage and even force peasants to continue planting commodity crops for export-oriented raw materials for imperialist industrial purpose. However, large-scale palm oil plantations, such as palm oil plantation, Indonesia have exacerbated land tenure inequality and are the cause of very severe and chronic environmental crisis. Not to mention the clearing of land and forests for national strategic projects such as development of the new capital city of Indonesia, food estate, tourism and large mining, and infrastructure of energy projects, including the development of coal power plants. Instead of addressing inequality of land ownership, forest destruction and poverty, the agrarian reform and social forestry, and various forest protection partnership in the name of climate solution actually worsen land ownership inequality, protecting and strengthening shackles of power of big landlords over the peasant with land rent system and usury, preserving Indonesia as producers of agricultural raw materials and maintaining cheap agricultural labor wage. In relation to as long as the semi-feudal mode of production under the dominations of imperialists persist, it will be impossible to restore the nature, climate, and social life. The Indonesian people struggle continues to advance the struggle to realize genuine land reform to eliminate all forms of oppression and exploitation by imperialism and feudalism in rural and urban areas as a social basis for realizing national industries that guarantees the progress and welfare of the people. The victory of genuine land reform is a fundamental way to build a new system that is equitable for the people, ensure and ensure the recovery of nature and the climate in Indonesia and the world. In relation to the COP28, the Indonesian People's Struggle or Front Perjuangan Rakyat as the part of the global people's caravan for food, land, and climate justice in responding to COP28 demands that climate crisis must be tackled by fundamentally changing the agricultural production system, which requires the eliminations of the monopoly powers of the landlords over the peasant in the countryside. The power of the landlord is a major obstacle to the advancement of agricultural production and handling the climate crisis. We demand to stop food estate program and all imports of food and agricultural inputs. And we also demand to permanently stop the expansions of large palm oil plantation and timber plantation for pulp and paper, and stop promoting and financing of planting and replanting of palm oil plantation in Indonesia. And as the global demand, we demand climate justice, and we need real solution that not take away our lands and resources. We call for action that ensure our right to food, and we want a future free from destruction, hunger, and deprivation. End climate imperialism, hancurkan imperialisme, oppress and exploit people of the world, unite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wawan. And yes, thank you for giving us an insight on how the global system of monopoly capitalism and imperialism destroys our ecosystem, destroys our planet, and continues to aggravate the climate crisis that we are facing. Then forward to COP28, talking about loss and damage fund and how it's actually not yet at this point in time, it's not in favor of the people who are most affected, because it's as the plans have mentioned, they are at the form of loans at this point. And thank you so much for sharing with us insights on how Indonesia as a country is affected by the climate crisis, especially by imperialism. Being a semi-feudal and semi-colonial state right now, we are pretty sure that with the demands of the Indonesian people and the global demands that we all uphold, we will achieve climate justice. So yes, once again, for everyone here, you may ask your questions via the Zoom chat box, and later on we'll tackle them during the open forum. For those with us for our live stream on Facebook and on YouTube, you may comment your questions as well, and our tech team will get those questions and we'll tackle that later on. For our third and final speaker, we have Celestine Akpobari, the National Coordinator of Ogoni Solidarity Forum. He has dedicated himself to extensive endeavors within the Niger Delta region. His advocacy resonates deeply, addressing both human well-being and environmental prosperity as interconnected pillars. Celestine, you have the floor.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon from here. It is afternoon in Nigeria, and good evening, good morning from wherever you are watching from. Another COP is here. Another season where people's hope are raised and dashed and smashed is here also. I'm from Ogoni, the home of the late environmental rights campaigner Ken Saro-Wiwa that was executed by the Nigerian government in 1995. For those that know the story of the Ogoni people, the Ogoni is an indigenous ethnic nationality based in the oil-rich but very poor Niger Delta region of Nigeria. Oil was discovered in commercial quantity in Ogoni in 1958. And so in 1990, the Ogoni people, under the leadership of Ken Saro-Wiwa, took stock of their conditions and observed that in spite of the stupendous oil and gas wealth in their land, that they were becoming poorer. Because before the discovery of oil in commercial quantity, our people were very successful and very wealthy fishermen and farmers. In fact, Ogoni used to be referred to as the food basket of the Nigerian people. But 30 years into oil extraction, the harvest was becoming poorer of the land. The fishes were no more available for fishermen for two main reasons. One, the pollutions that find their way into the river have driven the fishes and killed some, have destroyed the mangrove forest that houses the fishes. Then, gas flaring. When you flare gas in very close proximity to human habitation, and the daylight that the gas flare give to the river, to the water, the home of the fishes, does not allow the fishes to stay. So they migrate to deeper oceans where the poor fishermen in Ogoni does not have a fishing trawler to go and fish. And so that was what led to the non-violent Ogoni struggle that Ken Saro-Wiwa led. And just because indigenous people are considered to be very minority in Nigeria, for just leading that campaign, Ken Saro-Wiwa with 8 others were marched to an on-service gallows in Port Harcourt prison and executed. And over 2,000 young Ogoni men were also executed in cold blood because the military occupied the territory, because they considered that the Ogoni struggle, the Ogoni campaign was very dangerous because it was touching on the heartbeat of the Nigerian economy, which is oil. But now, at this scope, nothing has changed. You can imagine, it's been 28 years after the murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa, and it's been 30 years after we launched our non-violent struggle. You can imagine the number of people that have been impoverished because they can no longer fish and farm. You can imagine the number of people that have died because they inhale poisonous hydrocarbon in the air. You can imagine the number of people that have died of malnutrition because they don't have food to eat. You can imagine the number of people that have died because they drink bad water, polluted water, because there is no alternative in the absence of a government. You can imagine the number of people that have died because of lung-related diseases, because as they inhale poisonous emissions, the lungs and the heart become weak. You can imagine the number of burials that we carry on in Ogoni every weekend. And a new government came in May, on May 29. But things are not changing at all because the government is saying that 30% profit made from sales of oil will be used to look for new oil finds. And it is even worse in Ogoni and the Niger Delta where we come from, because UNEP submitted a report, United Nations Environment Program submitted a report. They conducted an environmental audit of Ogoni and submitted their report on 4th August 2011, which states that as of 2011, when that report was submitted, that 5 meters of Ogoni land, of the land was dead. But now, our land is permeable. The pollution that was 5 meters has percolated up to the water table. So meaning that there is no good water in our place. That there is cancer-causing carcinogen called benzene in the water taken in Ogoni. And that every water we drink in Ogoni is coated with ACM or crude oil. I'm talking about Ogoni, but the entire Niger Delta, which is the oil-producing bed of Nigeria, also suffer the same thing. And UNEP said it will take the Nigerian government 30 years to clean up Ogoni. And so even the Nigerian government stopped looking for more oil in Ogoni, because it will be madness that you claim that you are mopping the floor and you turn on the tap. It's only a madman that can do that. You turn on the tap, you are mopping the floor. It will be clean. But as long as they claim that they are cleaning up the mess that have been generated in Ogoni, it will be proper. The Nigerian government does not explore for new oil in Ogoni territory. In fact, by now, the government should be conducting environmental assessment in other Niger Delta communities, because Ogoni is not an island. For Ogoni to remain clean, it means that the surrounding communities must also be clean. Because if you clean Ogoni and you don't clean other neighboring community, because the water run together, it means that Ogoni will still be polluted. And you know, the tidal movement of water, when water ends, it comes with polluted crude from other communities into Ogoni territory. So even when there is no air production, the place continues to be polluted. And so we have come again to another COP where promises are made and are not kept. We are saying that the government of Nigeria should abrogate what we call the Land Use Act. It's a criminal law that takes away every land that belongs to indigenous people to the government. So government owns all the land, so they don't need to take permission from you. They don't need your consent. They don't need to consult you. If they want to take your land for oil production or anything, they just come. So the issue of land grabbing is very high because as long as that Land Use Act is in existence, every land belongs to government. And we are saying that at this scope, that government should abrogate the Land Use Act. We are also saying that attention should be paid on adaptation measures. You know, these criminals, these guys, these corporations, their attention is on mitigation. Like, let us prevent from coming to us. But those of us that are already living with the negative consequences of oil production or climate change, they don't want to talk anything about adaptive measures. They don't want to support measures we have put in place for adaptation, only mitigation. I think attention needs to shift toward that side. I'm also saying that all stolen lands to be returned to the people and reparations made. In Nigeria right now, all the oil companies are, in the name of what they call divestment, they are beginning to run away because community people have woken up to act, to make demands. So they are running away and leaving behind the pollution, the devastation, the loss of livelihood, the poverty, the hunger. They are leaving everything behind and running away. I think they need to come back to clean up their mess before they leave. And finally, we are saying that World Bank is not the proper bank that should host the loss and damage fund. Indigenous people, the poor people must sit down with everybody to think about the proper way to keep the money. World Bank is at the forefront of causing the entire problem we have in the world today. The poverty of the poorer nations comes from World Bank, and you are giving them the money again to keep. That will be to stifle our need. It will be to kill us the more. We want to breathe. Indigenous people want to breathe. The poor people want to breathe. Thank you very much as we continue this program.
All right. Thank you very much, Celestine, for sharing with us the Ogoni campaigns, the struggles of the Ogoni people. And yes, indeed, we need to talk about adaptation. COP28, and for the longest time, we have been talking about climate adaptation measures, climate mitigation measures. But let's be real, climate crisis is real and it's happening at this point in time. What are we actually doing for the people who are the most affected by the climate crisis? Is it just about money loss? We talk about loss and damage, but where is the climate adaptation plan that we actually need to ensure that the people that are being affected by the climate crisis because of the imperialists are actually, adapting to the climate crisis that we have at hand? So now at this point in time, we move on to our open forum. Once again, thank you so much to all our speakers for giving their insights on the climate crisis. And now for everyone, I am reminding you to rename yourselves properly. So if you have any affiliation or organization, please indicate it on your Zoom names as well, so you can be recognized properly when you ask your questions. You may type down your questions in the Zoom chat box, or you may click the raise hand button and wait to be recognized by anyone from the tech team. If you want to ask the question yourself, please indicate if your question is addressed to a specific speaker or to all speakers. Once again, if you guys want to say or ask your questions, you may click the raise hand button. At this point in time, we have questions actually that have already come in. For our first question, this is addressed to all our speakers. So I request the tech team to please add spotlight to our speakers as well. So the first question is, how do we make our campaigns for climate justice be linked and raised to the colonial wars of aggression like the one happening in Palestine? Once again, the question for all our speakers is, how do we make our campaigns for climate justice be linked and raised to the colonial wars of aggression like the one happening in Palestine? So from our speakers, does anyone want to answer? You may unmute yourselves if you guys want to answer the question for our speakers. So we have Peter, Wawan, Celestine, and Len. Does anyone want to answer the question? Okay, go ahead, Len. Okay. Let's go Peter first and then Len. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Sorry, Len. Okay, I just think to say something about Palestine in this bigger, much bigger topic of climate itself. It seems like a big leap, but really the the whole geopolitical struggle over the Palestine, Israel, and the bigger Middle East region is driven by the oil and energy politics of the last 120 years or so, and the fight about climate transition, even to renewables. Whatever it's really led by imperial powers, it's going to have the same features. So we have to be ready for people to have wars or other forms of conflict over control of the relevant resources for the new energy sources. That's pretty basic. So we can't just say, the anti-imperial struggle will solve the climate crisis by itself. We have to be much more detailed in our strategy than that. However, the two struggles are linked, that's for sure. I'll hand back to now.
All right, thank you so much, Peter. Len, do you want to add?
Yeah, I agree with what Peter has said there. That I think we need to have clear examples of where the imperialist policies are being implemented and impacting the world, particularly through aggression and war, and use those examples to show the link. For instance, in Palestine, on the West Bank, we've graphically seen the Zionist military digging up the plantations in Palestine and poisoning the soil. So the impact of that, plus the bombing, is having a big impact on the environment, and you can multiply that in so many parts of the world where aggression is taking place. So I think we need to be concrete with examples to demonstrate the link between aggression and war and environmental destruction. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Len. And Peter, for answering that question. Yes, indeed, climate justice and the climate crisis it's not that direct when it comes to the war and aggression, but you can actually see the connection there because of the US military being the number one actually in destroying the planet when it comes to its wars of aggression, like the one happening in Palestine. We cannot distance ourselves from the environmental impacts of the US military destroying our planet and destroying the homes and the lives of the people in Palestine. So for the next question we have, the next question is actually here in the Zoom chat box. Does anyone here have the best way or strategy to dismantle the doctrine of discovery in our respective country? These doctrines give birth to the doctrine of terra nullius, no man's land, which gives the indigenous peoples only usufructuary right over their own land or territory. Our respective government in Asia is using the same principle or strategy to suppress and marginalize the indigenous peoples. The indigenous peoples in Asia are experiencing the same as those in Palestine. So Peter actually answered this in the Zoom chat box as well. Peter, do you want to read your answer? And if anyone else wants to add on to his answer, you are free to do so. So Peter, go ahead. Peter, are you here with us? Do you want to answer the question again?
Yeah,
All right.
sorry. Okay. Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. But here in Australia, we've had this terra nullius. It was a very destructive concept, and it was applied legally to deny Indigenous people's rights up until 1992. So it was defeated in our court system. But I think that this kind of doctrine, a legal concept, can also be defeated in the legislature if the parliaments or congresses of our country, in whichever country, decided to apply the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in domestic law, because that declaration recognises the prior lives of Indigenous peoples and their ownership and custodianship of lands prior to European colonisation. So the main point I'd like to make, though, is that none of this would ever happen unless there's a determined campaign by Indigenous peoples and all of their democratic allies in the community to work at the community level, at the political level, and also in the legal struggle to insist that this old imperial doctrine be abolished and the real truth about every nation's history be respected, and therefore all the people's rights should be respected. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter. Does anyone else want to answer the question? Again, I will repeat the question so that if our other speakers want to answer the question as well. Again, the question reads, does anyone here have the best way or strategy to dismantle the doctrine of discovery in our respective countries? These doctrines give birth to the doctrine of terra nullius, no man's land, which gives the indigenous people only usufructuary right over their own land or territory. Our respective government in Asia is using the same principle or strategy to suppress and marginalize the indigenous peoples. The indigenous peoples in Asia are experiencing the same as those in Palestine. So if any of our speakers want to answer this question, feel free to do so by unmuting yourself. And again, for our audience, please feel free to send in your questions via the Zoom chat box, or you may raise your hand via the raise hand button here on Zoom. For our live stream audience on Facebook or YouTube, you may also ask your questions, and our tech team will be there to send over those questions to me. All right. So anyone else want to answer that question? Or if none, we can proceed to our next question. Okay, go ahead, Len.
Just to add a little bit to what Peter has already said, on a global scale, at the moment in Australia, Peter said there's a debate going on in regard to that, because the Aboriginal people, First Nation people are saying, well, what's the next step for us in our movement? And they're saying that one of the important steps is truth-telling. That is for the community to understand what actually happened to the Aboriginal people from after colonisation, and what happened and how it happened. And in a global scale, I think that's it, is that people need to understand. We need to find ways to get that understanding across. They need to understand colonialism, the stealing of native people's land in order to make money, to make a profit, and the impact of colonialism. And we can see it again right up to today in the Middle East, in Palestine, where you have the British colonialism, who in fact imposed this current circumstance on the world in order to have Zionism operate at one of its key puppets in the globe, in order to serve the interests of British colonialism. But of course, history then puts that into the hands of US imperialism today, who've taken over from British imperialism. So I think it is the question of truth-telling and exposing and discussing the history of how we got to where we are in regard to Indigenous people's rights.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Len. We actually have our next question in already. So the question reads, how do we campaign for climate justice given the limitations of COP28? They have proven their inutility and their allegiance to imperialists and polluters. Yes, actually, indeed. Actually, the COP28 at this point in time, the leadership is in the hands of oil companies. So actually, this is the same question that I have for our speakers. Maybe what are your thoughts on COP28? And furthermore, of course, how do we campaign for climate justice given the limitations of COP28? So I want to hear it from the speakers. Maybe we can have Wawan answer this as well, and Celestine, so that we can hear your thoughts on this question. Again, the question reads, how do we campaign for climate justice given the limitations of COP28? They have proven their inutility and their allegiance to imperialists and polluters. Go ahead, Celestine.
Okay, from my side, I think that considering the fact that we are weak as individuals, it will be better we come together, weaker cooperation. But the Ogoni people have been able to chase away share for 30 long years now because of international solidarity, networking. People are able to work together. So people in Manila are shouting, stop killing the Ogoni. Those in the US are calling, those in Indonesia are calling. That's the only way that we can sustain our campaign and put fear into them. Like now, the Nigerian government and the oil companies are trying to forcefully come back to resume oil operation in Ogoni. It is time we come together to say, no, you can't do that. You have to, there are issues of justice in Ogoni that are yet to even be talked about, like the legitimate demands of the Ogoni people are enshrined in their Bill of Rights. So actually what I'm saying is that since we have stopped oil production in Ogoni, there should be a national solidarity blocking every attempt by the Nigerian government and the oil company to resume oil operation. That's one way we can sustain our campaign. Keep the oil in the soil. And in other communities, if they have the power, if they can do it, they should shut down the oil well and chase them away, because everything about oil production is death. Death of the environment, death of life, death of water, death of the air. There's nothing good about it. So let's shut them down. I think that's my own.
All right. Indeed, collective action and international solidarity will put power in our campaigns. So yes, we do stand with one another in our fight for climate justice. Does anyone else from our speaker want to answer the question? Wawan, do you want to add to the question, to answer the question?
Yeah, I think I just want to add one point that this COP28, as I mentioned previously, is the momentum for the good momentum for the people of the world to expose the false solutions to tackle the climate crisis, and also to held the responsibility of the advanced capitalist countries to accountable for their loss and damage that they made in the historical and nowadays. And in this situation, the struggle of the peoples around the world is the as the solidarity, international solidarity struggle, means that it is very important also to assert our and to strengthen our struggle in our home countries. Means that like in Asia, in Indonesia and various countries in Asia, that now we are still in the semi-feudal mode of production. We need to overthrow the power of the big landlords because they are accomplices of the imperialists that now really lead the world to the climate crisis. Means that if we strengthen our struggle in our homeland, in our countries, to overthrow the power of the big landlord, means it will contribute to the struggle of the people in other countries, as it will weaken the power of the imperialist in the world. So that's why we also assert that genuine land reform is the fundamental way to tackle the climate crisis and also to assert and ensure our advanced people's life in the future. So I think that's my point.
All right, thank you so much, Wawan. Indeed, genuine land reform is a struggle that many countries actually face, including here in the Philippines. We need to increase and amplify our campaigns for genuine land reform so that the struggles of the people inside the localities are actually addressed as well. Okay, and while we are continuing with our national campaigns, we work together towards international solidarity and putting pressure, more and more pressure, to those imperialist powers who are actually destroying our countries and our environment. Len and Peter, does anyone want to add? Do you guys want to add more? This is the last question, by the way. So if you guys want to add more to the last question, go ahead. Okay, we have Len and then Peter. Okay, go ahead, Len.
Okay, well, I think look, if there's probably no doubt here on the audience here that COP28 is organised and led and made up by US imperialism and other imperialism. And so we wouldn't have any illusion that COP28 is going to fix the problem that imperialism has created and refused to fix. So I think that's clear, but that's not any different from any of our struggles anywhere in the world on any issue. That is, we always have to expose what the imperialist agencies are doing or not doing. But we recognize that it's only the force of the mass of the people who will eventually turn this around. And if we wanted to look at some small example of that, and when I say small, it's not finished yet, so it's got a long way to go, but we can see the tremendous impact that the support of millions of people across the globe has given to the Palestinian people, millions of people in the streets, and the impact that it's been having on the spokespeople for imperialism. Quite clearly, that is where we need to build the forces to actually defeat the programs and policies of imperialism. And I think that's a good example that's going on right in front of our face.
All right, thank you so much, Len. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I could just add that I think, first of all, with COP28, it's really good that there's campaign groups present there who will more or less immediately in real time confront the hopelessness of the approach being taken by the governments so far in this long process of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. So I salute those people, and I know what a big effort it is to do what they're doing. However, the other speakers are right that it's going to be really the struggles which completely spotlight the fundamental problem that the fossil carbon is still being produced and put into the biosphere, and this is being done for profit and for imperial power, and that blocking these projects, direct action, all forms of community action to stop the fossil fuel industry is the only way. It's a people struggle. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much once again to Peter and Len. And at this point, that ends our question and answer portion, the open forum part of this discussion. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in this discussion. And I can actually see the Zoom chat right now. People are actually talking there as well. So thank you guys also for keeping the Zoom chat alive and being engaged throughout this discussion. So now that we are pressed for time as well, if any of you guys want to further ask questions, feel free to message our speakers for today. I believe they've also sent their contacts. Yes, I saw it earlier in the Zoom chat. Someone asked for their contact details. So if you guys want to ask questions, feel free to message our speakers or message the PRCJ Facebook page as well. Okay, so at this point, let us all hear the synthesis and closing remarks from Enteng Bautista of the ILPS Environment Commission. Go ahead, Enteng.
Magandang araw. Solidarity greetings to all. Thank you for giving me the opportunity of representing the ILPS Environment Commission, or ILPS Commission 13. Congratulations to the organizers of this webinar, namely the People's Rising for Climate Justice, Global People's Caravan for Food, Land, and Climate Justice, and of course, the different commissions of ILPS, Commission 10, 13, and 19. It is heartening to see familiar faces, my longtime friends and comrades here. Hi, Peter, Len, and Celestine. It seems you're doing great, and as always, in service of the people. Educational activities like this play a crucial role in providing a real understanding of the impacts of climate change on the ground and the related people's movement or struggles confronting the climate crisis and its root causes. In behalf of the organizers, my utmost appreciation or gratitude to our speakers. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. COP28, as the chairperson of ILPS said earlier, is pathetic. As shared by our speakers, the COP, much like its predecessors, has pretensions to address the climate crisis. COP28 will surely result in token agreements, profit-making schemes, and proposals that further enable the plunder of our resources and the degradation of our ecological system through false climate solutions. The grandiose intentions of petrostate organizers like the United Arab Emirates to shock and awe us with the news that they have agreed on the loss and damage fund on the first day of COP went up in smoke. The global loss and damage fund, projected as the primary focus of COP28, fell far short of the much needed support that the third world countries require to address the impacts of climate change. Initially, polluting imperialist countries committed a meager over $400 million to the fund, a mere drop in the bucket. Recently, the United Nations estimate that up to $387 billion will be needed annually for developing countries to adapt to climate-driven changes. The initial commitment of this polluter is just 0.1% of the real annual budget needed for loss and damage. Again, these commitments are voluntary and not legally binding obligation of big polluting countries. Moreover, with the push of imperialist countries like the US, the World Bank has been tasked with managing the fund for 4 years. However small the climate fund is, international rubbers like the World Bank will have its big chunk of the climate cake. This situation echoes what transpired over a decade ago when the climate fund was proposed in Copenhagen in 2009. The estimated support needed by developing countries to address climate change impacts was $100 billion annually. Global contribution only began in 2014 after the Paris Agreement. And as of 2022, only $10 billion has been raised. This is just 0.8% of the needed fund of 1.3 trillion for the period from 2009 to 2022. Imperialist countries feign genuine concern for the climate crisis while using COP processes to perpetuate false solutions, such as packaging clean coal, as shared by Wawan in Indonesia, nuclear power, and big dams as clean technologies. They institute corporate market mechanisms and profit-making financial instruments like carbon trading, REDD+, or the reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, but actually it's a profit-making machine or method by corporation, and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, all to profit from different climate change interventions at the national and global level. As Wawan shared to us, in Indonesia, these solutions lead to more biodiversity loss and forest degradation, privatization, massive privatization of mineral and agricultural lands, and huge or millions displacement of indigenous peoples. As Celestine highlighted, the impact on rural farmers and indigenous peoples, the situation in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, reveals the stark reality on how these imperialists, along with their local puppets, big landlords, maneuver to privatize their land, forests, deplete their oil and natural resources, pollute their rivers and seas at the expense of the environment, peoples, and communities. Conference of Parties have failed to produce meaningful steps to mitigate climate impacts, support climate-impacted countries to adapt to climate change. The Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement stand as clear examples of how imperialist countries and their big private monopolies manipulate the United Nations and international climate agreements, rendering them ineffective in addressing the climate emergencies, the crisis, and its root causes. Since the establishment of the UNFCCC, global carbon emission and global temperatures have continued to rise to historical levels, exposing the failure of COP and the United Nations. Until now, wars of occupation and aggression are not being tackled as one major sources of environmental devastation, carbon emission, and wasteful use of resources, as the global military-industrial complex continue to incite and fund wars to make profit. The military-industrial complex remain as the bigger consumer of fossil fuels and mineral resources, also the world top polluter, which are primarily being used, the fossil fuels and mineral resources, to produce products to maim and kill people and destroy communities and nation infrastructures. As Len Cooper mentioned earlier, we have lost so much biodiversity, inundation of communities, destruction of livelihoods and lives, and much more since that climate talk began 3 decades ago. As a result of imperialist plunder and war of aggression. Yet, at Conference of Parties, civil society groups, people's organizations, and poor countries repeatedly expose imperialist countries, powers as the real culprits and perpetrators of the climate crisis. Events, particularly outside the COP, especially the protests and mass mobilization, effectively reveal how big private corporations dictate the agenda and results of the COP. As Peter pointed out earlier regarding Australian workers, these actions underscore the importance of people's movement in challenging the status quo and pushing for meaningful change to seriously address the impacts of climate change not only to the environment but also to the welfare and interests of the workers and, of course, of the communities. Workers in imperialist countries are on the forefront of the climate movement in criticizing and challenging their governments to seriously commit in reducing their carbon emission, move away from fossil fuel production and consumption, while at the same time fighting for living wages, job security, and safe working conditions. As Celestine told us, the importance of grassroots movement, the Ogoni people in Nigeria have consistently fight for their rights and defend their communities and land against foreign occupation, resource plunder, and ecological pollution. The fight for climate justice of the Filipino people as they stop destructive project and anti-environment policies of the Philippine government by mobilizing thousands of people to protest in the street, while at the same time, revolutionary groups such as the New People's Army forbids and punishes big corporations in their controlled territories in destroying the environment and also in violating the rights of the people, particularly the peasant and the indigenous people. These are few examples of how people, communities fight for climate justice. So, as we discussed earlier, what we can expect from COP28, fortunately, we anticipate nothing significant coming out on the negotiation in Dubai. However, it is an opportunity for us to expose the duplicity and greediness of imperialist countries in addressing the climate crisis. Inside and outside COP is a classroom to educate our allies, friends, and the public that the climate talks dominated by imperialists and big corporations will not and cannot address the climate crisis. We must raise their consciousness to the root causes of the climate crisis is the continuing domination of the global monopoly capital, as pointed out by our speakers. If we do our work effectively, this will result in more organizations joining our networks. Our organization, particularly the People Rising for Climate Justice, the International League of People Struggle. More importantly, real gains for our people and communities, such as stopping big mining, commercial logging, big dam project, oil wells, and monocrop plantations. COP28 is an opportunity to strengthen international solidarity and movements against the resource plunder and environmental devastation perpetrated by imperialist countries, particularly the US and its big monopolies. COP28 is a challenge for us to mobilize hundreds or even millions of people for climate justice. As we discussed earlier, we must link our campaign for climate justice to the movement against imperialist war of aggression and occupation, such as what is happening now in Ukraine, Palestine, Iraq, Libya. Concretely, we must mobilize on December 9, the Global Day of Climate Action, to put forward the demands of nations, peoples, and communities to address the root causes of the climate crisis and oppose the resource plunder and climate violation by monopoly capitalists and make them accountable, while at the same time project and pursue the democratic aspiration of the people like just transition, genuine agrarian reform, national industrialization, and the like. As more COPs or conference of parties are likely to come, we and the next generation must tirelessly work for climate justice and show the people and the masses that the real solution of saving the earth, our world, can be truly achieved through fighting the people's democratic rights, through winning national liberation like in the Philippines, India, and Palestine, by defeating imperialism at the global level, and through pursuing socialism to the end. Magandang gabi, and thank you very much. Fight for climate justice, down with imperialism, Long live international solidarity.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Enteng, for giving us your insights and for wrapping up and summarizing today's event. So that's it for today. Thank you guys so much. On behalf of People's Rising for Climate Justice, Global People's Caravan, and the International League of People's Struggle, we would like to thank all our participants and live stream viewers. Finally, to all our speakers, thank you for your strong messages, championing the people's perspectives, struggle, and solidarity. Let us strengthen our fight towards real and meaningful climate action. And in this light, as Enteng has mentioned, we would like to invite you all to our Global Day of Action for Climate Justice on December 9. This will be a PRCJ-led event, so people calling for climate justice, hold your governments accountable, down with imperialism, get out for people and planet. Okay, once again, I am Cian Guevara from Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, a Fridays for a Future of the Philippines, and ILPS Commission on Science and Technology. Thank you very much, and long live international solidarity.